This video is going to focus on research basics. We'll be covering 4 main topics that are helpful to learn about before you jump right into doing research. So first, we'll talk about scholarly and popular sources and what the difference is between them. Then we'll talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. And then we'll touch on keywords and source evaluation. I will put a timestamp in the description of this video, so you can skip around between the topics if you need to. Some assignments, depending on what the topic is and depending on what course you're in, may have very strict guidelines as to the kinds of sources that you can use. For example, a short informative essay might allow you to use popular sources, whereas a psychology essay that's 5 pages long is probably going to require scholarly sources. So what does that mean? We tend to think of journal articles when we think about the library databases, and those are usually scholarly journals. These are articles that are written by experts. So for example, if it is an article about climate change, it's going to be written by a climate scientist or someone with direct experience, whether it be by work or perhaps through an advanced college degree. Now, the difference here between some of the other kinds of sources is that the audience is also experts. This can make them tough to read sometimes, but it usually means that they contain lots of top-notch research and information. You can usually identify these articles because they're quite long. Some may be 3 or 4 pages, but you may not be surprised to find a 20-page scholarly article. Since these are written by experts and for experts, at times the language can be a bit technical. You also won't really find any kind of advertising or photographs unless it has to do with the experiment done. So you may see graphs, charts, and tables, but usually not going to see, just a picture related to the information. One of the most important things about scholarly journals is that they are heavily cited. Just like you have to include a works cited page at the end of your essay, professionals do as well. So this is often a quick and easy way to figure out if an article would fit as a scholarly source. Now, think about popular sources as magazines. These are usually not written by content experts, but professional writers or journalists, and the audience is the public. So they're written, they're shorter, they're less technical, more graphics based, because the audience is the general public. So they want it to be able to be read by a wide variety of people. You'll often see advertising here, and you usually do not find references. They may be mentioned within the text, but you're definitely not going to find a formal works cited list. So again, popular sources, think of those as magazines. So things like Time, Newsweek, Sports Illustrated. Again, depending on what your topic is, a popular source might be appropriate. If you're writing about a sport, you're probably not going to find a whole lot of professional research about the sport, but Sports Illustrated may have what you need. On the other hand, if you're researching a more scholarly topic, scholarly journals are probably where you want to be. Now, there are different kinds of scholarly journals as well. You may have heard the term peer-reviewed. These are scholarly journals that are vetted by experts in the field. So let's say I'm a scientist, I do an experiment, I submit my article to the journal. Other professionals in my field will read the article anonymously, and look at my methods, make sure my experiment was ethical, things like that. And then if they give it the seal of approval, it gets published. So peer-reviewed articles are a step above even a scholarly journal article because they've already been vetted by an expert for you. So a professional, an expert has said, yep, this is a good one. I want to briefly show you a scholarly source and a popular source, just so you know what to look for. These are articles that I pulled from the library databases, so these are pretty similar to what you'll see. So the first source is a scholarly journal article. So as you can see, it's pretty plain. One other tip is that it gives you the credentials of all the researchers or people who wrote the article. Another tip that an article is scholarly is the term abstract. That's just our fancy academic way of saying summary of the article. Another way to tell if an article is scholarly, sometimes if it involves original research, you'll see categories like methods, results, kind of like you would in a science lab. But if I scroll through quickly, you can see the only real flashy graphics here are data related. So that is another hint. And then at the end, you can see that we have 2 to 3 pages of citations. And if we look, we can see that the citations are not, random websites. They are other scholarly articles. Now, in contrast, here's an example of an article on the same topic, but from a magazine. This is from Time magazine. And already you can see the difference. The first 2 pages of the article are all graphics, so meant to kind of draw your eye in and get your attention. And then as we look through, you can see that there really aren't any kind of citations. Again, there may be a few. If there are data points in the magazine article, often they'll at least tell you who they got that information from. But again, it's not going to have a link or anything like that. So you can just see from looking at the vibe of this article is very different from a scholarly article. And as we get to the bottom, you'll see no full page of citations or anything like that. So those are some of the ways you can try to distinguish between scholarly and popular. Of course, not every scholarly or popular article is going to look like this, but I think it's a good starting example. Another important aspect of research is knowing the difference between primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. You do know the difference, you just may have never heard them put in this term before. We actually start on the right with tertiary sources. This is usually step 1 in the research process. Tertiary resources usually cite primary and secondary sources and don't incorporate any new or personalized research from the author. These are usually general overviews, encyclopedias, a textbook. Think about sources that cite lots of other sources as the bulk of the information. So you'll see next, once we look at a tertiary source to get a good background or overview on our topic, then we move to secondary sources. So these become a little more specific, get more in depth, and also are current. So with a source like an encyclopedia or textbook, a tertiary source, they can go out of date quite quickly. But secondary sources usually involve journal articles or literature reviews, ebooks, videos, things like that. And the trick here is that they use a primary source as evidence. So it's not someone writing it during the time or doing the original research. They're reading an account of an event or a research study and then writing about it. This is usually where most library sources fall. You'll see the most in-depth would be a primary source. So this is what people experience or have done research on. The trick with primary sources, though they can be helpful, is that they can at times be biased, or they lack the, how can I say this? They kind of lack the knowledge that we learn over time. So for example, if we're researching the Civil War, we can look at a soldier's diary. But of course, they don't know both sides of the story. They only know about their personal experience. So think of primary sources in that way. They're helpful, but it's really not the base of an essay. Newspaper articles can also be helpful, but are also primary sources. So that's what's really effective or helpful about knowing the different levels of sources. Because an original document, a personal account, a newspaper article only paints a picture of that topic at that exact time. Whereas a secondary and even a tertiary source can look back at that topic with all of the knowledge we've gained since then. So I'm going to show you some examples of types of sources. So first is a tertiary source. Again, these are usually encyclopedias that give you a basic overview of your topic. So you can see the title of this book I'm looking at is Battleground Criminal Justice. So it's 2 volumes of a book, and you can see it's just got little blurbs on all kinds of criminal justice topics. So if I'm researching domestic violence, you can see there's 1 chapter out of all the chapters that's really going to help me. So again, you can see that it's talking about the background of the topic, legal and social moments, important court cases, the theory behind it, practices. So this is a really good starting point because you can learn all there is to know about your topic. And once you know a bit about your topic, then you can do more effective searching. If we go into a database and just search domestic violence, we're going to get all kinds of stuff. But odds are there are specific things about domestic violence that you want to write about. So again, this is an example of a tertiary source. Now we move on to secondary sources. So you can see this is a more professional article. And we can see the important part in the title here is a literature review. So that means that these researchers writing this scholarly journal article did not do any kind of original research. So they didn't do an experiment, but they've looked at a lot of other experiments and kind of reviewed or condensed them into one essay. So instead of having to look over the last 20 years of journal articles and try to read through all of them, they've done that for us. So that's an example of a secondary source. They're looking at primary sources and then summarizing them. I've got 2 examples of primary sources for you now. The first is a scholarly journal article that would be a primary source, and that's an original research study. So you can see that by the title of this article, this is not a very general overview of domestic violence. No, this is intimate partner violence during COVID-19 in northern Ethiopia. So it's extremely specific. It looks at a certain window of time. And they're not reading a book or another article to find this out. They're actually going out into the community and interviewing people in Ethiopia to learn more about this topic. Another example you might come across, especially in a newspaper or magazine, would be someone's personal testimony. So for example, the author here is talking about how it's so hard to be a mom during COVID-19 and not have a break from your family. So again, that's another example. This doesn't tell us everyone's experience of COVID-19, but it tells us one person's. So 20 years from now, we may have a very different perspective of this article if we were to read it. But for right now, it's showing us a little peek into current times. So those are primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. This is important information for you to know, as your assignment may require certain kinds of sources. The next important topic we're going to address, another one to really think about before you start the research process, is the importance of choosing your keywords. Your keywords are just the specific words that you put into the library catalog or a library database that give you the search results you're looking for. Now, in the book catalog or ebook catalog, you can just put in a general topic because books usually cover lots of aspects of a specific topic. When it comes to journal articles, though, as you saw in our previous segment about primary sources, some journal articles can be extremely specific to a location, a time, a gender. So if we were to just go into the library catalog and search for violence, we're going to get so much stuff. And odds are that your topic isn't just violence. There's something about that you're interested in. Is it a certain kind of violence? Is it a certain demographic? Is it a certain location? There are so many things that you can think about for those topics. So the best thing to do before you start to go into the databases, you could also do this after you've looked at tertiary sources. So after you read an encyclopedia or a source like that and get to know a little bit about your topic, then you'll start to write your keywords, and then you can start to look for more in-depth information. So how do you do that? Honestly, the easiest thing to do is to start out and even for 30 seconds, think of everything you know about your topic. Once you kind of look at that and you figure out exactly where you're going, you want to write your topic in the form of a research question or a statement. Now, in some cases, your instructor may have already given you the research question, which is very helpful. So once you look at that statement or question, you want to circle the important ideas or concepts. These become your main keywords. So for example, you can see that we've made a research question here. What are the effects of media violence on teenagers? So the main concepts in our research question are effects, media violence, and teenagers. Think of it kind of like a who, what, where, when, why, how type of question. Once you have that research question, you're going to think of synonyms or related terms for each of the highlighted or circled parts of your research question. So you can see below, we've done it a little bit already. So how else could we phrase effects? We could say consequences. What about media? Is it just media, or is there a specific kind of media? Is it television? Is it films? Is it video games? Then we can look at the word violence. Could be violence, aggression, destructive behavior. And then we think about teenagers. What other words are there for teenagers? It could be young adults. It could be adolescent. It could even be teens. So you'll kind of write down all those different keywords. And then we're going to put them into database speak. So the way library databases work, it's not as neat and friendly as Google. In Google we can have misspelled words and punctuation and all kinds of stuff going on. but Google is intuitive. It can kind of predict what we might have meant. Library databases don't work like that. It's primarily word recognition. So if we search for teenagers in the library database, it's only scanning all of the articles looking for the word teenagers. It's not like Google where it's going to pick out teenagers and youth and young adults and kids and all those other terms. It's only going to give you what you put in. So the reason we think of synonyms are so that we can find the widest array of articles for our research. So when you go to a database, don't expect to just put in 2 magical keywords and get everything you need. You may need to spend 30 minutes in one database changing your search strategies. You may want to go to 3 different databases and try the exact same few search strategies. But the way the library databases, most of them are organized, is that you'll see they have what we call Boolean operators. Really, it's just the word and, or not. It helps you combine all of the keywords. In a library database search, if you put an entire sentence or let's say a 5 or 6 word phrase, the database is going to pick and choose which words it looks for. So what we try to do is break it down into the smallest chunks and put each word into different boxes. So this will make sense when you visit a database like Academic Search Complete, where it actually has the and, which would include the or, which, you can put in 2 different synonyms and it'll look for both. Or you can also use not, perhaps if there's a related topic but not quite what you need. So you can see, based on the keywords we came up with, I might do a search for media and violence and teenagers, see what I get, maybe find 2 or 3 good articles. Then I can change it to media and violence and adolescence, and I may get a totally different set of results. Then I might choose to change it up a little bit and do television and aggression, and teenagers. So don't expect, again, to do that one magic search. You'll see linked here in the LibGuide, there is a keyword worksheet to help you kind of work out your own keywords. So you can see here's another example. Should Facebook be used as a source of information? So the important topics have been circled and picked out. And then you can see we've come up with synonyms for some of these. And then we have additional keyword strategies. So I can do Facebook and citations and information. Maybe I don't find what I want. Okay, let's try Facebook and references and information. Still not finding what I want? Okay, let me make it social media and citations. So there's also some space where you can start to work this out on your own for your own topic. The last topic we're going to cover in this video is source evaluation. This is important because, as you may know, not all sources are created equal. When you're doing academic work, it's important to make sure that you're finding reliable information. So it may not be acceptable to go to some of the places where you get information in your daily life. We're used to just going to Google, doing a search, and accepting the first thing that pops up. But academic standards are a bit different. Now, I assure you, this is not an acronym that I came up with. This is a national standard, but it's pretty easy to remember. Every time you find a source, just ask yourself, is it crap? And this is a step that you'll probably do either during or after the research process. So as you're finding sources, evaluate this criteria to figure out if the source is strong enough. Again, as with many of our other research tools that we've talked about, how strict you are with these guidelines may depend on the type of assignment, the course that you're in. So these are just some general guidelines. The first thing you're going to look at, the C, is currency, or how up to date the information is in your source. When was the book published that you're reading? When was a website last updated? Does that make it out of date, or does that make it current? So if we are researching a historical topic, a source that's a little out of date might be okay. But if we are researching, presidential elections, it might be important to you to find the most current information as possible. So again, that step is a little bit subjective. It's going to depend on your topic, and it's going to depend on your assignment. And sometimes your instructor will even give you a specific time period. In general, I would recommend staying within the last 5 years. I'm going to skip the R. We'll come back to that one. We'll look at the first A. That is authority. That's looking at the source. Who is the author behind your article or book or whatever source you're using? And who are they? If it's a website, you may also want to ask who is the organization or sponsor behind the website. You really want to look at the author's credentials. So is that person an expert somehow on your topic? Think about when we were looking at scholarly versus popular. What makes a person an expert? Usually education or work experience. If you have a less formal or less scholarly topic, it usually just means some kind of exposure. For example, if you're doing an informative speech on skateboarding, probably not going to find someone with a PhD in skateboarding. So a professional skateboarder might be the way to go. That person would be an authority. So you want to look at organizations. Do they have any kind of bias? What are their credentials? Do they have some kind of expertise in the field? Arguably, the most important part of the evaluation process is looking at the accuracy. Even experts have opinions. So it's important, depending on your assignment, to look at how correct the content is. And how do you figure this out? Citations. So think about why you include MLA citations in an essay. It's to show your instructor where you got your research and that it was a credible source. Professionals need to do that as well. So look at citations. Are they there? In addition to just having citations, are they citations to other trustworthy sources? Do the sources you're finding kind of agree with each other? Of course, sources won't have identical information, otherwise you wouldn't need so many. But do they cite different dates for a specific event? That could be a sign that one of your sources is not reliable. Tied to authority and accuracy, we look at purpose. You may also hear this referred to as bias. So you're trying to figure out the reason this information exists. We try to find information that is objective, impartial, and unbiased. The author's purpose would be to educate you. If you're writing an informative essay, you'll want to find this kind of information. If you're writing a persuasive essay, it may be okay to use biased information, again, if the author is proving that it's accurate and not just giving a personal opinion. You often want to be careful of this in sources that are less scholarly, like websites or magazines, even newspaper articles, and also with political types of research. This can be really biased, and people can have very polarizing points of view. So remember, if it's an informative essay, that you want the person to try to inform you, not to persuade you, not to maybe be a little sensationalized in order to entertain you. You want that educational content, and that's why we tend to look at experts. Now, let's go back to the R. That's kind of the final piece of the puzzle that ties all these parts together. We want to make sure that the information is right for you. Does the article relate fully to your topic? Are you the intended audience? Is the information appropriate for you? If you're researching a medical concept, I would not recommend going into the nursing database because at this stage you likely do not have the ability to really fully comprehend medical research. Do you have a variety of sources? So have you used some secondary sources and maybe some tertiary sources? Again, that may depend on your directions, your assignment instructions. So tying it all together, really asking yourself, is this the best source I can find? So many students will often approach me in the library and say, I wrote my essay, now I need 5 sources. That's not how it works. That's backwards. You should be finding all the information you can and then objectively writing about your topic.